Bible is full of stories that we all know and love. But how well do we know them? The answer might surprise you. The Bible you thought you knew is going to dive deep into the exquisite details of the biblical stories that make them fascinating and transforming. This week's podcast will be a question and answer session. The question here is, why were Israelites called Hebrews? We very easily talk about the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew culture, the Hebrew language. But that does not answer the question, why were they called Hebrews in the first place? Interestingly, the word Hebrew is not used all that often. Handful of places in Genesis, for example, in Genesis 14, verse 13, Abraham is famously called a Hebrew. In Exodus, when the Pharaoh and the Egyptians were exercised about the Israelite population, there's a handful of references to the Hebrews in their culture and how bad this is going to be for Egypt. There's a handful of references in 1 Samuel, a couple of places where the God of the Hebrews is mentioned, mostly in Exodus, the land of Hebrews, once in Genesis, the children of the Hebrews, again in Exodus, and so forth. But it does not answer the question, why Hebrews in the first place? Interestingly, this is connected, in my judgment, to two words, a Sumerian word and an Akkadian word. Akkadian is a way of talking about ancient Babylonian and Assyrian texts. In Sumerian, the word is SA.GAZ, capital S, capital A, with a dot, capital G, capital A, capital Z, SA.GAZ. In texts in which the Sumerian is translated into Akkadian, the Akkadian word is chapiru or chabiru. What can we say about this word? First of all, people who are called chapiru or chabiru speak every conceivable language: Babylonian, Assyrian, Canaanite dialects, and so forth. Also, these people occupy every conceivable location. They are found throughout the territory that we would refer to as the ancient Near East. There is no one place where they are somehow localized. That you can find texts that indicate the presence of chapiru or chabiru in virtually every place in the ancient Near East. As well, these people are referred to in texts of various times of dating. In other words, they occur in the early parts of the second millennium, the middle parts, the later parts. They are not chronologically specific. They are found throughout the materials, regardless of where you date the material. What do these terms have in common? If they have every language group, every location, every ethnicity, every possible chronological diversity, what do they have in common? Well, what they have in common is this. First of all, people who are called SA.GAZ or chapiru are no longer in their original social or political setting. They are people on the move. They are people in a place different from where they once were. And that means that they are alien in a new social or political setting. Sometimes this alien status in this new social and political setting is sustained for a little while. After a while, after a couple of generations, it becomes sort of a designation, almost like a name, rather than designating a social or political type. The question is, why are these people on the move? Why have they left their original social or political circumstance? Well, there's a variety of reasons for this. One is economic distress. If the economy is bad, if it's difficult to sustain your family or your extended clan because business is bad, money is hard to come by, trading is poor, and so forth, you're going to go into a new social or political setting to try to improve your situation. Once in a while, the movement has to do with political chaos or oppression. People typically will tolerate a modicum of political chaos or even political oppression, but if it's too severe and if it's too long and there's no end in sight, people start thinking about a way to extricate themselves from that situation. Social stress would be part of this as well. And very often these things go together. Political, economic, social stress are all common factors in what causes this kind of movement. Once in a while, it's simply the grass is greener syndrome. Perhaps things are going pretty well. Perhaps the economy is not bad. Perhaps you're able to take care of your family or your extended family or your tribe quite well. But you have heard that their situations elsewhere are even better. And so you think, well, if the grass is greener, I'll give it a try. And very often that is the explanation of why people are on the move. Now, typically, back in the day, the idea was that people were on the move in the ancient Near East because they were nomadic. Very often this was considered semi-nomads because full nomads are seen to use camels to go from here or there. These are ass nomads, a little bit a different animal from a camel. But even an ass nomad does not really explain what is going on. First of all, we have very stereotypical ideas of ancient nomadism, thinking that this was just simply people on the move as a way of life. In later research, we discovered that nomads were connected quite regularly and quite obviously to settlements. And this makes sense. If you are a nomad, you have to have people with whom to trade. You have to get goods and materials from people in the settled areas. You have things to offer them. Again, just the economic situation means that you're never going to be a nomad, meaning that you're always on the go and you're never really tied to any kind of settlement area. Back to the biblical material. The idea that a chapiru or chabiru is not in a particular, in their original political or social situation. The word that is used in the Hebrew Bible is Ivri, from which we get the translation Hebrew. And this makes absolute sense when we think of the ancestral stories, because Abraham and Sarah were quintessential Hebrews. That is to say, they were not in their original setting. In that story, they left their original setting because of God. They went to another place, again, because of God. So what would we call people who are not in their original situation but are in a new situation? I would use the modern term immigrant. An immigrant does not tell you the reason why a person became an immigrant. Very often it was for an economic reason, a social reason, a political reason, or a grass is greener situation. And that makes perfect sense for the ancestral stories, because in those stories, Abraham and Sarah, later on Isaac and Rebekah, later on Jacob, Rachel, Leah, and his other two wives, and that extended family, they were in an area that was not in their original social or political setting. Likewise, in the Exodus story, they are sort of resident aliens. They had been treated well in the Joseph story in Genesis, but when a political regime came to power that no longer recognized the Hebrews as a primary benefit, but saw them as a deficit, things turned bad for them. But in both of those cases, they were resident aliens. Sometimes they were called gerim, or sojourners, or Hebrews, and in so many ways these are simply synonyms. There's even one place in the Bible where you can see that Hebrews were not originally part of Israel. This is in a text in 1 Samuel 14, verse 21. Let me read it to you. Now the Hebrews, who previously had been with the Philistines and had gone up with them into the camp, turned and joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. That tells you that these Hebrews were immigrants, and they could attach themselves either to Philistines or to Israelites, because there was nothing about their ethnicity, their nationality, their original setting that would color where they would be in a subsequent situation. That's always the case with an immigrant. An immigrant is always in a process of assimilating. It usually takes 2 or 3 generations for the assimilation to be complete, and is where you become so much part of the culture that you only have some vestigial, residual areas of your previous life. Now, I want to talk about one example of the biru or the SA.GAZ that gives us an indication of one possibility of how a Hebrew becomes a Hebrew. These are from the Amarna texts. The Amarna texts are texts that were written between officers in Egypt and the captains or mayors of city-states in Palestine at the end of the late Bronze Age. In these letters, many of them are going to Egyptian authorities. They are asking for help, which means they want the Egyptians to send troops. Why do these mayors of these city-states want troops? Because there is social unrest. For a variety of reasons, the populations are in a process of rising up against the political leaders of these cities. It's either for economic reasons or social reasons or political reasons. In fact, when these letters are read, the mayors of the city-states in Palestine say, please send troops, because these populations are encouraging the rest of the citizens to become like them, that is to say, to become like SA.GAZ, to become biru. Again, that's a place where you are going to encourage people to be a resident alien. You're going to encourage them to go up against the resident political apparatus, the people who are in charge. This is civil disobedience. This is the kind of thing that mayors or governors or state presidents or state governors or presidents of countries are always afraid of. Will the people knuckle down to law and order and that sort of thing? And these texts indicate that they wanted an Egyptian show of force in order to quell these little mini riots. Now, before long, the Egyptians did show force, and the things quieted down in these handful of city-states in Palestine. But that was one example of what made a person become an immigrant or a refugee in the first place. And so the Hebrews are called Hebrews because they are immigrants or they're refugees. And there are many, many stories which explain a great deal of biblical material from this, including the idea that Israel was sojourners, they were resident aliens, they were in Canaan, which was not their original home, they were in the Egypt area, which was not their original home, and when they went into Canaan and they put up shop there, there is some evidence that they joined with other refugees and other immigrants to form together Israel, to become the Israel that sort of showed up almost overnight in Palestine at the end of the late Bronze Age and on the dawn of the early Iron Age. So in any case, that's why Israelites are called Hebrews, or at least this is my judgment, and this is my idea. And we could say more about this, but this is enough to answer the question as to why Israelites were called Hebrews in the first place. You do get some of this idea, this refugee status, even in sometimes in the New Testament, where the Holy Family, Jesus and Mary and Joseph, had to flee from Palestine and take refuge in Egypt, which was a great irony given the Exodus story. But again, that's part of the refugee or the immigrant tradition in the biblical material. So next time we'll do another question and answer period. So if you want to ask me a question, text me at fspina106@gmail.com. In the meantime, go to my website, let me know what your email is so that I can contact you for the mini courses. I want to thank you so very much for listening to The Bible You Thought You Knew. I have a question for you. Do you have a question or topic that you'd like me to cover on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to Apple Podcasts and do two simple things. One, leave a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. Two, in that review, ask anything you want related to the Bible. That's all you have to do. Then, listen in to hear your question answered on a future episode. Join us next time on The Bible You Thought You Knew when we discuss Jesus' personal Bible. God bless.